Unlock the path to healing with Exposed podcast. Join us as therapists from around the world break mental health taboos, share powerful stories, and provide insights that transform lives. Tune in, educate, and thrive.
I remember I got a little talk from the unit psychiatrist before I got discharged from last hospital. And it was, if you want to have a good life, don't expect too much. We don't think you can do college. We think that you've had some intellectual and cognitive damage. We don't think you can do too much, but you can have a nice little life. Just take your pills. Don't expect too much. Don't push it, basically. Just sit down, shut up, and behave. And here's your pills. So
Welcome to Expose podcast. I'm so excited to welcome Melissa Perker. They, them, LMHC, a highly experienced psychotherapist and consultant at Center Psychotherapy in Arlington, Massachusetts. As both a trauma consultant and someone living with dissociative identity disorder, Melissa brings a unique perspective to their work. Melissa is deeply involved in the psychedelic-assisted therapy space and also founding member and board president of Healing Options for Post-Traumatic Experiences, HOPE, a nonprofit dedicated to making psychedelic therapies accessible to everyone, including communities. With a huge training of EMDR, transpersonal therapy, ecotherapy, and humanistic trauma consulting, Melissa's approach is compassionable, holistic, community-driven, and we are going to dive into this some of those topics, but I just want to welcome you. Thank you, Melissa, for your presence, but also all your work, and how you dedicated your career to help so many individuals have a better quality of life.
Thank you for having me today. I'm glad to sit down and have a conversation with you.
I'll just move my mic here. Oh, by the way, the sound was okay, I hope so. Okay, for our audience, do you mind sharing a little bit of how it was for you to find the pathway of what you are doing today? Like if you can share a little of the history, what made you to be interested in what you are dedicating your time today?
So I have to say, first of all, it was an accident.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder when I was about 33. This came after a really long time of struggling with the effects of trauma and all that comes with that. I was seeing a therapist who I now realize later was assessing me for DID formally. I was a little out of it at the time, really struggling. And when I got the diagnosis, I was horrified. DID has a pretty ferocious reputation in the world, especially in mainstream media. I mean, if you think about the films and the books and the stories that are made up about people with dissociative responses, they're pretty bad. We're usually axe murderers or otherwise really unpleasant, dysfunctional people. So I was full of dread. I was pretty suicidal and I was just really struggling. And a friend of mine just kind of offhandedly offered some MDMA, just said, hey, but maybe just take an afternoon off, just go take this stuff and just chill out and whatever. So since I was pretty suicidal at the time anyway, I was like, what if I got to lose, So decided to try MDMA. I was considering it at the time a recreational substance. It was something I'd never really encountered before, but I wasn't adverse to. So tried the MDMA and, settled in for what I thought was just going to be a lighthearted kind of, like maybe pot but better type of experience. And what happened instead is that I came into full contact with my system, the system that I'm a member of, I came in full contact with my trauma. I came in full contact with everything awful that I was dreading that really made me want to die. And it didn't make me want to die. I was in this very kind of protected space, this very gentle space, but also very direct and forthright. There was no, um, how do I put it? It was just everything that happened was very direct, very matter of fact, and very kind as I experienced it. And at one point in the experience, I found myself just watching the story of my life. I found myself just watching every awful thing I ever experienced just play out in front of me, one after the next, after the next. It felt like it was going on forever, but really it was maybe, I don't know, an hour or two, but it was just everything awful. And I just found myself, instead of just wanting to die or scream or do something awful, just kind of sitting there in the state of acceptance and kind of going, oh, yeah, yep, yeah, that happened. Yeah, okay, that's why I'm like this. That's why I struggle in these ways. And it was just really, it felt as close to safety as I'd ever felt in my life. Um, of course, this experience kind of rocked me, right? Because I didn't think this would ever be possible. The therapist I was seeing at the time was telling me about all of this therapy that I would have to do, and I'd have to do this exposure therapy. That was the thing back then, where I would have to, recount every last horrible thing that I'd ever experienced and talk about it until it no longer bothered me. And that just sounded awful. It just sounded like a sentence of just reliving the trauma in really unhelpful ways and possibly even just making things worse. And I realized that probably wasn't necessary, that I mean, yeah, sure, I needed therapy. Who doesn't, right? But maybe it didn't have to be so awful. Maybe DID was not some type of a living death sentence. Maybe I was not going to be incurably crazy for the rest of my life. So I got on the internet, because I was kind of curious about this stuff. I was like, MDMA, what is it? Who's using it? What are people saying about it? My frame of reference for it was that it was a club drug. It was something that you'd take to go to a rave or a club or a party or whatever. So I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know if anybody else had had an experience like the experience I had. And come to find out, there was this organization, MAPS, that was researching the use of MDMA for psychotherapy for PTSD. This totally flipped me out. I was like, wow, people know about this. The word got out. And not only that, but at that time, they had spent 20 plus years researching MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. At this point in my life, I had been a hairdresser. I was a really good colorist and makeup artist for about maybe 15 years or so. And I was really feeling that my time doing this work was just coming to a close. It was fun, it was good, but I wanted something different in my life and I didn't know what to do with my life. So I just let things settle. And soon after that, I started to hear a voice in my head, a voice that I'd heard before, that was just telling me, hey, you need to be a therapist. We need to go be a therapist. We need to go to school for this. And that was just overwhelming. In my mid-30s, I'd barely earned a high school diploma. I had been institutionalized for a couple of years between 17 and 19. And if you do enough worksheets in a psych hospital school, they give you a high school diploma. But I was not a student. I was somebody who didn't really attend school very consistently or very successfully. Didn't really learn well. I had been flagged with a lot of learning disabilities, and I think my cognitive abilities and intellectual abilities had come into question at different points. So this terrified me. But I decided to see what this was about and to try to pursue going to school. So at that point, I applied to Goddard College, which is now sadly closed, which was in Plainfield, Vermont, in order to study transpersonal psychology, developmental psychology, and a whole bunch of other stuff I was really curious about. And I earned my BA in 4 years, and then I applied to Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I chose Lesley because they had a program that was focused on trauma counseling and trauma therapy. And it looked like the best education for the type of work I wanted to do. And that all brought me here.
I don't have much to say, just kind of honor your journey and how the society condition us, in certain ways to think we're supposed to have things by a certain age, and there is so much unnecessary, and I'm touching my shoulders to release that pressure,
Yeah.
so much on our shoulders. And I'm so happy that you honor your timing and you and I'm saying you, all parts of your day, um, everything. Is that's how should I? That's the other thing I didn't ask you even. How do you want me to?
What type of language should we use?
Yes, like when I say you, should I say they or them?
So we use they, them pronouns partly because we are non-binary and
Yeah.
partly because we are plural.
Yes. That's
So even though some system members very strongly identify as female, some very strongly identify as non-binary, some of us are just totally gender non-conforming, it fits to use the they, them pronouns because we're also speaking to plurality as well as gender.
Mhm.
In terms of words for system, thank you for asking. A lot of people don't. We use the term system, and people in our system are system members. System members are people. We don't really call ourselves or experience ourselves as being parts or fragments or alters or any of that business. Other people do, and that's totally cool. One thing that's amazing, I think, about the plural community is that there is so much diversity of experience and expression of experience, which I just think is wonderful. But we typically do say people or we say system members. I'm a system member. I am often the outward facing face of the system, but it's not just about me. And at different times, there's different system members co-fronting, meaning interfacing with the outside world together. And we usually do kind of mask as the person you see in front of you. And we do this basically because it's the most comfortable way to kind of interact with people, especially people who aren't plural. When we're among other plural people, we do drop the mask a little bit more and our presentation does look a little bit different.
Thank you. Thank you. So from now on, I will use system,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes, we are a system.
System members.
Yes, we are a system that is full of system members.
Okay. So do you prefer system or system members? Because I just want to make
So
sure.
altogether, we're a system.
Uh-huh. Okay.
System constitution is of many different system members.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I can visualize it, I'm a highly imaginative person. I like seeing things before. Yeah, my mind makes it pictures right away.
One of our first and most intense MDMA experiences was actually seeing ourselves as a system. It was, because it's always been, we've heard system members and we've seen things, and there's been different issues of perception involved. But at one point in the experience, I remember it was like it was almost like a daisy. I have a picture from a presentation we gave a couple of years ago, actually, about psychedelics and DID. And a friend helped me draw the picture, a friend who's a much better artist, actually a real artist, much better artist than any of us are. But they helped us draw the picture where it was a petaled flower. It was basically a daisy. And there's the center that kind of holds us all together. And then there's all the different petals that represented all of us. It was a very psychedelic experience, so it wasn't quite so concrete. But yeah, I wish I had the picture for you now. It was about 2 years ago. We presented at the Healing Together conference in Orlando, Florida, and we were talking about psychedelics, psychedelic therapies, and dissociation. And it was really great to see this conceptualized on a slide in the presentation. It's funny, I was just putting together our presentation for this year. We took a year off of presenting last year, but we're going back this year. And we'll be presenting again about psychedelic harm reduction and about the future of psychedelic therapies. And I do plan to use that slide again because the image is just so powerful, where you could just kind of see the concept of the system as it was at that time.
I love how the subconscious brings those pictures from within, and and it helps others to understand the system. Because this way all the parts can, all the parts, like we human can see each other on our way.
Mm.
Because now I know, and I can see the system as the daisy, and
Mhm.
it just symbolically, but it also all matters, all that picture, and then those coming out of the center, those how do we call it in English?
The petal.
Pedal, that's right. um so could we talk a little bit about the stigma? um
Ah. There's so much stigma about DID. There's so much stigma about therapists having DID. And there's also, I think, an idea that's really emerging between good DID and bad DID. There's a lot to unpack here. We've been out now for a little bit over 4 years, and we came out because of stigma. We were sitting in a training that was about treating dissociative configurations, and the trainer was just awful. She was making jokes about people with DID, and it was like a bad stand-up comedy routine. And we just got so angry that we were like, you know what? We don't have to deal with this. We should come out. We should speak the truth. Maybe somebody will listen.
mm,
So we created an anti-ableism workshop for the Healing Together conference. It was right at the beginning of COVID. We were all on lockdown, and it was a remote conference. And it was a great way for us to kind of dip our toe into the community and start to do some advocacy work. And the main thrust of the first workshop was really just talking about our experience as being a fly on the wall. That was the name of the workshop, where people didn't know that they were talking about us when they were talking to us about people like us and about that experience, and going into more general anti-ableism practices for therapists and for supporters and for community members. There's tremendous, I think, anger and fear from some establishment therapists in response to those of us with lived experience standing up and telling our stories. I think there's even more anger when the stories that some of us are telling don't match the theories that therapists have been drawing from for decades now. I think there's a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of a move to silence or diminish or vilify those of us who don't fit into the mainstream. I mean, some people's narratives and experiences of DID and OSDD totally fit in with the textbook and with the establishment thoughts about that. But I think as more and more people are coming out and reclaiming their narratives, there is a significant need to reevaluate the theories as they are, and maybe see if they need to be expanded on or just reevaluated in general. And I think that brings up a lot of defensiveness in the community, especially when you get somebody with DID who's a therapist who also has the nerve to talk about how great psychedelics can be for helping to heal trauma.
then you have this great mixture of everything, and that's how, you know just I feel you can experience blast, you can experience all of it together without resisting on trying not to see all of the parts of the system. And so many of us were conditioned to don't see us members of the system connected, like the condition, of the West society, everybody individual and kind of being for themselves, and the idea of comparison, the idea of judgment, and all that disconnecting all the parts of the system,
Yeah.
which creates more trauma. That's the reason. What do you think about? Yeah.
I think we're seeing this a lot in what I'm just going to term as the plural community. I realized I didn't define that earlier. Plural is a relatively newer term that speaks to I guess, the ethos, the values, the belief that people have plurality to them, that even if somebody is a singlet, which is a person who is not OSDD or DID or otherwise a
Yeah.
dissociative person, that there's parts, right? IFS, I mean, even just going back to Freud, people have talked about parts. People have talked about parts of the consciousness, parts of the persona, parts of the person. So we know that everybody has parts. This is very clear. So those of us who identify as plural, most of us are traumagenic systems. We're formed from trauma. We have what would be considered with the DSM, DID or OSDD. And then there's some other folks in a plural community. I think it's a smaller group, but I think they're still part of us who are more of what's considered an endogenic system, where they're just folks who are maybe naturally more plural, more in touch with their parts or aspects of self. So I do identify as somebody who is diagnosed formally with DID, although it's a little D on the end because a disorder isn't always a disorder. And I also identify as somebody who's plural, who just has an association, an affiliation, and an affinity for the idea of plurality. Plurality, I think, is much less pathologizing and much more maybe freeing and respectful of people's experiences. And so I think in the plural community right now, we are having one hell of a cultural moment. More and more people are coming out of the closet as having lived experience with OSD or DID or, however they care to term it. And we're telling our stories. And like I had mentioned earlier, we're getting a lot of pushback in some corners from a lot of members of the establishment, mostly singlet. And there's also, I think we're in kind of a growth and settling phase. You know how like group dynamics have all their different phases? I feel like we're kind of going through some of those phases, but in different ways as a community, where we're trying to figure ourselves out, where we're trying to figure out how to make room for everybody and everybody's stories and experiences, and how to hold space for things that maybe we don't understand or experience ourselves, but know to be true for other people.
And I love that, I love that you, by sharing your story, you're educating all of us on that because, at the beginning, I mean, I didn't know actually what they, them means. You just taught me that. So thank you for that. And I feel I'm not the only one who will learn. If that's the only one thing you learned from this episode, we did it.
Yeah, totally.
But tell us, there is so many questions I would like to make, but because there is so much curiosity around, oh my God, living 30 years without being diagnosed, like going to school and just living this society who is driven to make you certain way and like keep in the box and kind of yes and no answer and black and white reality where the rainbow of the system is like where we are and
Yeah.
being excluded. I just wonder because your voice represents all those people who have been suffering and they're still living in that little box, not realizing that there's even a name for it and that there is therapies. Like we're going to talk soon about those different modalities you experience and which are helping people. But could you share a little more how it was for you? I mean, yeah, is there anything the system would like to add to that? How was the experience before being diagnosed and just childhood and then adolescence and just watching all those people, quote unquote, who identify as she or he without, including them? How was that?
I don't remember. I think as a system, our memories of our earlier life are very scattered and feel very distant. I don't have a lot of chronological memory.
And also, I wanted to ask for permission, if I have permission to know. Only if I have permission. And also, I want to let you know that if that's, I want to let know the system that only if that feels good and that I respect your boundaries totally.
Yeah, no, thank you. We have a way, I think, of answering questions in a way that is helpful to the folks that we're talking to,
Yeah.
but also protective of our own experience. So cool. We are survivors of developmental trauma, chronic trauma, as well as poverty, homelessness, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Our memories of our earlier life are typically very hazy, kind of, it's almost like if you have a deck of cards and you just throw them up in the air in the next room. That's kind of in some ways how most of us, but not all of us, refer to and interact with memories of our past. Our truest memories probably started, and by truest memories, I mean the ones that we remember the feel of and that we were present for, when we got out of our last mental hospital at 19. Being institutionalized for 2 years was awful. The first institution we were in was actually eventually closed down because a young child was killed in a restraint hold gone wrong. It was a very abusive institution where the staff members, depending on their mood, would just kind of basically beat up on the kids who were there. After being there for about 6 months, we were transferred to another hospital that wasn't as overtly violent, but yet every time we would dissociate, we would wake up in restraints and medicated. So this was not good. We finally got out. We were living in a rented room in a small town in Connecticut, and we started to have a life. You know, this voice in our head at the time, who we later identified as a very valuable and beloved system member, started to talk to us about going off of our medications. We were misdiagnosed, I don't even know how many times. We were completely medicated out the wazoo. I remember there was always at least 5 prescription bottles on our windowsill by our bed. We were supposed to take these pills 3 times a day. I think at one point we were taking about 20 or something pills a day. And we were miserable. We couldn't finish a sentence. We couldn't think, no personality, just a flat blob. And this voice in our head just kept saying, hey, you know, it's not you, it's the pills. Just stop taking the pills. They were like, hey, you know, when they first gave them to you, they gave you a little bit more and a little bit more. So what you have to do is just start taking a little bit less every day. And so we were terrified. I was terrified because, first of all, okay, I'm talking to a voice in my head, right? I spent 2 years in institutions. They've said I was crazy. Here's the crazy. And then I was also terrified because it was always imposed onto me the importance of taking these medications. That, you know, I remember I got a little talk from the unit psychiatrist before I got discharged from the last hospital. And it was, you know, if you want to have a good life, don't expect too much. You know, we don't think you can do college. We think that you've had some intellectual and cognitive damage. We don't think you can do too much, but you can have a nice little life. Just take your pills. Don't expect too much. Don't push it, basically. You know, just sit down, shut up, and behave, and here's your pills. So we were terrified at the thought of not taking the pills. But then one day we had just kind of had it. You know, we just kind of were like, no. So we started taking a little bit less. We broke up the pills that we could and took less, and the ones that we couldn't break up, we just started taking every other time. And eventually we worked our way out of all of our medication. And something really weird happened where we didn't go crazy. We didn't end up back in the hospital. We ended up having clear thoughts. We ended up having wants and needs and interests and conversations with random people. And so we started to have a life, and that's where the real memories started to begin. That's where we started to make friends. That's where we eventually met our wife, who we are still married to. We just celebrated, I think, 28 years. I'm terrible with timelines, but I think we're married 28 years this August, and I think we're going on 30 years together. So we really started to do activism. We came out as gay. We got involved in the gay community. We joined a drag house. We started to do all kinds of things that we were told we could never do. So memory has always been interesting. It's more of like little snapshots or little peripheral images of things. And then some memories are experienced very differently. They are very much here, right in front of us.
Wow. Thank you to system for sharing all of that. There were so many moments I felt like stopping the system and just acknowledging what the system been through, like being taught, just keep your life short, and like, I mean, that somebody could say this to the system, like, you might have a life. And I mean, it's like, who has the power to tell the system or anyone what they can do or can do? But the system has so much resilience, so much resilience. I just wanted to highlight, like, the system decided, I'm not going a little less, and then one day the thoughts the system mentioned, the thoughts were clearer, and the needs appear by itself.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was weird. I mean, we were still losing some time. We were still pretty dissociative. We understand this better now, and it makes total sense from where we sit. But at the time, we are like, what's wrong with us? I remember Wednesday, or gee, I was just with friends at a party in New York, and now I'm suddenly in the middle of a grocery store. How did that happen? We didn't say much about it because we were afraid that people would think we were crazy. Even through the later years in our 30s of going through school, we very much heard, what people thought about, quote, crazy people or people with DID or whatnot. And we were terrified. We definitely did our best to kind of keep our head down and just blend in, especially in grad school where people are really watching you. We chose a very progressive program. We chose a very trauma-informed program, mostly for the education, but also because we figured, okay, maybe we can just fly under the radar. Maybe this is a less pathologizing based program. Maybe we could just kind of blend a little bit more. And we mostly did. We hit a few bumps, but we made it through. But it was terrifying. And even in our first internships and our first jobs, I just remember always being scared of just always having to present as hypernormal, as just this person, this total mask of a person, basically. And it's such a relief not to have to do that anymore, not to have to be afraid of being found out, because we decided to tell our own story and get in front of our own narrative rather than get found out by anybody. But it is scary. Even the most progressive psychology programs, there's a lot of outdated information. There's a lot of thoughts about people living with dissociative adaptations that are simply untrue and pretty awful. So it was scary. I think we breathed a huge sigh of relief when we finally had our license, our LMHC license in our hand, and it was actually ours.
Yay. How
Yes,
good it had to feel. Oh my goodness.
it was such a good day.
You remember? Oh, wow. The system remembers. Yeah. That it has, because it was waiting for so long to get. I can realize how much relief it might, and that just honoring all the parts of system who are working so hard, so many times masking, so because it wasn't allowed or welcome, or just didn't know if it will be welcome. And to institutions like internships, and I'm just honoring all of that, how the system created a way to survive and thrive through it all. Like, that's genius. I mean,
Well,
that's
I think that's what DID is. There's this idea that people with DID fracture, right? That we have a trauma and we fracture and split off.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that's never true, but I actually think it's more like we find a different configuration and a different way to grow. We
Mm.
find a way to adapt to our circumstances, and maybe our internal system reconfigurates in order to meet our needs. But I don't think the whole myth of fracturing is always the whole story about how we come to have different system members.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, and I wish I had the picture with me now. Last summer, I went on vacation. And before I went on vacation, I tucked in my garden and I was growing cucumbers because I love cucumbers. I love making pickles, whatever. But I have like this chicken wire, kind of like a lattice for the cucumbers to vine up. And one of the cucumbers, when it was a tiny little baby cucumber, about this big, I think it got stuck horizontally between the pieces of lattice.
Mhm.
It grew on either side of the lattice. So this little tiny cucumber grew in the middle of the lattice, and
Oh,
on one side of it was a cucumber, and on the other side there was another conjoined cucumber. And I just stopped dead in my tracks. I'm like, okay, this is DID. This little tiny plant
no.
got caught between two different ends and had to figure out how to grow. So instead of breaking or fracturing or dying off, it just grew into two cucumbers.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So beautiful. I know how also the system saw it as the representation of of the system,
Mhm.
the genius of that, and how we can, by sharing it now with me, we can understand more about how the system wants to be seen by the rest, which is needed. And I just wanted to ask if there is any permission from the system to know what happened when the system decided, which is so brave. I want to acknowledge, so brave for the system to say, to tell the, the during the internship, to tell it to the another therapist, or no.
Oh, we did come out during internship. I'm sorry if I was unclear.
Oh,
We
maybe I didn't
waited.
understand probably.
Yeah, no, we waited until years later. We actually came out in 2020.
Okay.
So
20.
we were in
Okay.
group private practice where we're working now. And we are working in a context now where we don't work. I don't think most of our clients, not our clients, I don't think most of our colleagues have a lot of really ableist notions about dissociation. We work at a group practice where most of the folks that we work with, most of our clients are dealing with some level of trauma.
Mhm.
Uh, and there's a really respectful thought process around the work that we do. When in 2020, we felt that we had enough autonomy and enough safety to come out. So we came out when we were giving the workshop for Healing Together, the one that was called Fly on the Wall. We
Mhm.
were, I wish we were brave enough to come out during grad school. It's so wonderful to hear stories from people now who are coming out in undergrad or in grad school and who are taking their place and taking up room and, you know, really being out there. We were not that brave. We didn't even know it was possible. We
Mhm.
didn't really know it was possible until I want to say like maybe 2018, 2019. We started to Google again, right? Because when you're curious about something, what do? You go to the computer. So we
Yes.
started Googling, can you be a therapist with DID? And of course, we came up with nothing at first, but then we came across the work of Dr. Jamie Marich, who is a psychologist who came out with OSDD, I believe in 2016. Again, we're bad with numbers. Sorry, Jamie, if I got this wrong. But we realized that they had done it. And through Healing Together, we got to meet Jamie, and we consider her to be a really good friend of ours now and just a really wonderful person. And at that time, we were like, wait, she did this, she survived. Maybe we can too. We sat with that thought for a while, maybe even years, but really kind of let it sink in that somebody had come out of the dissociation closet. They looked like they were doing reasonably well in life, pretty happy, pretty successful, doing really, really important work that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do if they were closeted. So that was kind of our inspiration. It was like, okay, this is a possibility. And we chewed on that for a while because, yeah, we're not that brave.
And you are, the system is that brave because now it's sharing it and the audience is listening, people, and who might get inspired by the system who is sharing it now. So who we are to judge the timing, different parts are coming out different moment, and it's the judgment is conditioned, I think, much
Yeah.
more.
I mean, especially where we're coming from, where we were really taught not to trust ourselves, that we should trust the mental health professionals or the medications
I,
or whatnot. And no wonder they thought there was something wrong with our thought process or capabilities. We were so medicated
yeah.
that, if somebody said, do you want a Coke or a Sprite? We'd be sitting there like staring at you like, what's a Coke? What's a Sprite? Let's think about this. We
Uh-huh.
weren't even present, both from the dissociation and from the medication.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense that the system didn't trust to reveal itself, expose itself. Is my favorite
Right.
word. Uh,
Yeah.
because it was so unsafe and it experienced so much harm before. And each time it tried to, in the past, each time it was met with pain and suffering and trying to, push it down and with those pills. So the system, took so much punishment and pain unnecessary. So there's no wonder the system didn't want to trust. No wonder. I
Yeah.
wouldn't trust. Even though I have different parts of me, I wouldn't trust. Um, I don't, it's like nobody knows what the system been through. Nobody.
Yeah. I'm glad that our life is different now and we have different people in our life.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, I'm so glad about that too. And that there are therapists who have that's my favorite word because of, I'm from Poland, so many times things come up. Dissociative identity disorder, yes. Whatever name it is, it just created for people to realize this is real. This is real thing, and we need to realize the impact um, of that the system has on the whole society, because that was another idea in my mind. What if that was a blessing? What if that was a blessing for all of the community and the other parts of the universe and world, to see that there are individuals with the system structures, with the face of the system on it, who represent the complexity we all have in us, but we might have it more hidden, less accessible, which it takes years in the therapy, like, to figure out, oh, that's why I feel conflicted, because one side of me wants, see this person as my mother, another side is in the present moment, and it's what's going on, why am I getting triggered? So we all have that. So, but the system reminds us about the genius and complexity, but also the beauty, and that all those not opposite feelings make sense. Like, do you want Pepsi? Do you want cola? What it is?
Yeah. They all fit. And that was, I think, one of the really great takeaways from MDMA use was that, okay, so, maybe the trauma is about this big, right? This is about as much trauma as we have. And at the time, our life was about this big. So no matter what direction we moved in, our trauma was socking at us. But then what we learned to do is grow the life. So maybe the trauma, yeah, it's still, there's really no way of changing that. It is what it is on a certain level at the end of the day. But if the life now is this big, proportionally the trauma is smaller and it's not banging into everything. Maybe it's more of something that we do deal with sometimes, because of course, how would you not? But it's also maybe a guide. It's also something that informs the work that we're currently doing and helps us understand a little bit more about other people's struggles. We don't assume when we sit down with clients who also have DID, we don't assume that we know anything in particular about their system. If you've met one person with DID, you've met one person with DID. That's it. There are maybe some understandings or sensitivities or awarenesses that those of us with lived experience might have sometimes, but that's it. But we have learned, and part of what guides our work with our clients is, how do you grow the life? How do you come to some form of acceptance, not approval, but acceptance of what you've experienced as being true? Find a way to embrace it. And by that, I mean embracing yourself, not the abusers, not the abuses, not the things that you've experienced in that way. But how do you embrace yourself and just deal with it and go on to build a life that's more than worth living? That's fantastic. and how do you grow that life so that proportionately the trauma gets smaller? It's still there. It needs to be dealt with. EMDR, psychedelics, talk therapy, expressive therapies, all of these things are absolutely great for healing work. But at the end of the day, too, we still have to accept that some days are going to be hard days, right? Everybody has those days where you just can't, where you're just like, nope, not taking phone calls, not taking a shower, not doing all the things, staying in bed and just doing it, right? So everybody has those days, DID or not.
Yeah.
But how do you make it so 9 times out of 10 you are doing what you want to be doing with your life?
Mm. 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 Thank you, Melissa, for speaking about how, all the system was created because of some trauma, and the trauma is still in the process of release. And we hope that for the system the most to heal and in the time the system needs to take. And it creates so much compassion for all of, I hope, the audience and me to realize that some things didn't meant to be neither, right? Nobody is supposed to go through the suffering.
Yeah.
And the parts, this disorder specifically, and many personality disorder were created because of trauma, and how it got stuck. Or actually, you can correct me, how do you see that? But actually, I didn't want to go there. I wanted to talk as we were getting to the end, and I want to respect your time and your clients. You might probably have another meetings within.
I do. I'm seeing a supervisee in just a little while.
Say again?
I'm seeing a supervisee in just a little while.
Okay, so how many minutes do we have, just so to make sure that you have time to break, that the system has time to break for the break? And
Have a 2 o'clock appointment, and I need at least 15 or 20 minutes to grab some lunch before I see my
Sure.
2 o'clock.
So maybe 10 minutes and we finish? Is that
Perfect. That would
perfect?
be great. Yeah.
Okay. I would like to talk a little about the psychedelics and how what it feels good to talk about now.
Yeah.
How it can help not just people well, maybe we can focus on that, but just general public using psychedelics in therapy. And what are your thoughts on it, your insights? You have been facilitator, but what the system would like to share?
Oh, it's tough. So the
Oh yeah.
FDA
Yes.
reviewed all of the information that's the past 40 years of MAPS work and decided they want more information. I have a lot of feelings about this, but we only have 10 minutes. I'm just gonna proceed. Unfortunately, people with clinically significant dissociation have been left out of the clinical trials that have been going on. There's a lot of fear about working with dissociative adaptations in people who have them, which I think is deeply unfortunate. What we did see in the phase 3 clinical trials of the MAP studies is that folks who had dissociative type PTSD did actually better with the modality, with the therapy, than folks who did not have dissociative type PTSD. None of us who know anything about dissociation and psychedelics are surprised by this, right? We are living in constant unordinary states of consciousness when you have significant dissociation. It totally makes sense that a substance that really provokes a non-ordinary experience of consciousness would be helpful to us. It's sort of like having a home field advantage in working in this particular area. So as of now, there are no legal ways of accessing MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in the United States. In certain towns and counties of the state that I live in, psilocybin has been decrimmed. We do have a statewide ballot initiative for psilocybin and other plant medicines coming up in November. This gives us some optimism. But aside from ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which I am a practitioner of and I do strongly believe in, we don't have any legal access to this. So it puts us in a rock and a hard place where we know through research and through anecdotal experiences that these interventions work and that they're helpful, and that, yes, there are risks. There are always risks, especially with folks who have been really badly abused. there's always risks. But that said, a risk isn't necessarily a deal breaker. I think if people are thoughtful and well-versed about trauma and dissociation, we are not at any more elevated risk than anybody who doesn't have a dissociative configuration. Right now, we're kind of stuck in a wait and see. In 2020, another thing that I and a bunch of friends and colleagues did was we founded our nonprofit, which is Hope Healing Options for Post-Traumatic Experiences. Our ultimate goal is to provide psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies to folks and not having cost be a barrier to access. We've had trouble getting off the ground with a nonprofit because not a lot of people really want to donate to our cause. Most grants we've written, for one reason or another, we've been rejected from. Largely, I mean, in some way, I think also because we're writing grants for things that don't quite exist yet. But even now, we're trying to write grants for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for folks. And for one reason or another, there's always a reason not to fund us. And I think this points to a larger issue of access and who has access to these therapies and why are some people being blocked from access to these therapies. So there's a lot of work to do in both, I think, the mainstream psychotherapy community and in the psychedelic world. Even as somebody who is a student in the California Institute of Integral Studies program for psychedelic therapies and research, I came across a mind-boggling amount of ableism from one of my faculty advisors in terms of DID, and encountered a lot of very disturbing thoughts about people with trauma in general and people with DID in specific. So I think there's just so much work to do. There's so much unpacking of why we think what we think. And the big we, I do include myself in this. I am sitting in a psychotherapy office in a pretty mainstream place, in a pretty mainstream context, and I am part of this too.
Thank you to the system for creating the Hope Foundation to facilitate this any type of psychedelics, but ketamine, any therapy which people might need, which many times the money is the issue and challenge. And what the system shared, it made me realize I had this thought about one woman who is doing research on psychedelics, and she's raising the money through GoFundMe. So I wanted just to offer that. Probably the system knows that, to create the link for it, and then we can crowdfund it. Like I could share it, and other people can share it, so more people can fund it. Like I actually had a GoFundMe to create expose when I was starting it, and many people support those causes. So why not? So if the system is open,
We do. We have a Give Better campaign that we've had for years. And I'm happy to send you the link to that.
Perfect. I can include that link under this also interview for others who witness the system and now are better understanding more about what we discussed, and not just about, well, yes, dissociative identity disorder. With my Polish accent, dissociative, the system has to forgive me for this. It's a lot of DD, okay?
Yeah, we have a lot of D's in this conversation.
Right, but thank you so much, Melissa. It was a pleasure to have them and the system, and Melissa. Thank you. Is there any last word would you like to share? I like to always give some space before closing.
I just want to let folks know that there are other people out there, that whether it's dissociation you're dealing with or something else, mental health wise or even physical health wise, or on whatever level, that there are other people and that you're not alone.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Melissa, Parker. Actually, I'm going to make the speaker view together. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Melissa, Parker, they, them. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I just touched my microphone, almost broke. Sorry. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and please subscribe my YouTube channel. For you, it's a one click. For me, it means the possibility to continue creating impact in the world with those videos. Thank you, and see you soon.